Good day there viewers, my name is Cliff and welcome to my channel called Vintage Time. I'm certainly glad that you can join us today, and in this episode of How to Cut Gemstones I'll be faceting a piece of quartz, but we'll be talking about freeform faceting. You probably noticed in the opening credits that Jaws made a little cameo. And for those of you who don't know, well, Jaws is a special friend of mine and sometimes is featured on this channel called Vintage Time. So I'll drop in a design of what the freeform basically looks like, and then I'll get Jaws to work out how I'm going to go about the process of cutting this particular gem. So here we have a diagram of what a freeform gemstone looks like, and the whole concept of what a freeform gem is that the designer or the faceter has to cut a stone to suit the outline of the natural gem shape. So this seems all too hard for me, so I'm just going to get Jaws to work out some of the angles. Nice one, Jaws, thanks for that. So before we start faceting, I need to glue a brass dopstick to the gem, and the type of glue I use is a 2-part epoxy, and it's placed in a transfer jig overnight, and here you can see that the glue has hardened to the gem, and I'll start faceting. So I'm ready to start faceting, and I should say that this particular piece of quartz and this design I've been holding back for quite a while whether I should do it or not, and one of the reasons for that is that this particular gem that I'm going to facet will be entered into a state local competition. In general, I'm not a huge fan of competitions when it comes to cutting gems, mainly because it takes a lot of time and effort. However, with this freeform design, because I have little experience in freeform, I felt it would be really good to get a judge's opinion on how I'm cutting, particularly with a design that you have to sort of make up a little bit as you go along. One of the things about these competitions in Australia, and this is an open competition, it means I need to face off or match my skills with some of the best gem cutters in the country. So with a lot of these gem cutters, not all of them, but many of them like to just facet for competitions alone. So they're faceting the same design year after year after year. So this particular freeform design has been done by various faceters quite a few times over. So I'm up against it, and it's probably not a great idea to be making a video of a gem you want to put in a competition. Anyway, that's enough about the ramblings about freeform competitions. So what I've done in the meantime, I've used a 100 grit disc and I've set the protractor angle at 65 degrees. In my opinion, even though the design sheet does say that you can cut the girdle first, most faceters prefer to cut to a center point first. Using your mask correctly and cutting to that center point where the culette forms, you tend to get a more accurate gem. So obviously if you're using a 100 grit disc, the culette point or the culette tip will usually chip off, so you move down through the finer grade discs to form a nice even center point. So now is the time to facet the girdle, and if you've done a good job on the first tier of pavilion facets, cutting a perfect center point, then the girdle meet points will line up really well. So at the moment I'm using a 100 grit disc because I have quite a bit of material to grind away and I don't want to waste the rest of my day just grinding. So later on I'm going to be using finer grade diamond laps, but I want to explain a little bit about that later on. There's a few useful tips that might be handy for those facetors out there. So here you can see that the girdle facets have been cut with the 100 grit lap, and you can also see that they're meeting quite well with the pavilion facets. So after cutting the girdle facets with my 100 grit diamond lap, I moved on to an 800 and then finally to 1200 grit diamond laps. For me, the next step is always going to be polishing the girdle outline, and I don't need to polish the entire girdle, only part of the girdle. So I set my protractor angle at around about 89.5 degrees, and that can vary on the size of the gem. So I only want to polish a little bit of that girdle outline, as you'll see in a moment. So here you can see part of the girdle that I've polished, not the entire girdle, and this will save a lot of time. You don't need to polish the entire girdle outline. So the next stage is to facet the rest of the pavilion facets, and you can download such diagrams from faceting.org. So as I mentioned earlier, I would drop in a little hint about the type of laps you would use as you move from your 100 grit all the way down to your finer laps. Now in my case I went from 100 grit and then quickly onto an 800 grit lap, and then the final lap I'm using, as you see now, is only going to be a 1200 grit. I'm not going down to a 3000 or an 8000 pre-polish, and I'll explain why. So when you're using diamond bonded laps and they get a little bit worn, and this occurrence can happen anywhere from a 600 grit all the way down to a 3000, but for example in my case it was a 1200 grit lap, when you cut the facets it leaves a type of a sandblasted effect on the facet, and you see no visible scratches at all. This sandblasted effect is particularly noticeable under a loupe under high magnification, and you'll get to identify what this looks like after a period of time, which means you can go on to this phase straight onto the final polish. So if you can understand the behaviour and the wear on some of these laps and how to use them, you can actually save a lot of time by not having to go through this process of moving through all the pre-polished discs. Not only are you saving time, but you're saving a lot of money because you're not having to invest it in all these magical pre-polished discs that seem to abound these days. A lot of these wonder products come with a hefty price tag and overpay, promising that it's going to solve all your faceting needs and be a quick fix solution. I would rather see any faceter, particularly learners, be able to afford to facet and create a quality gemstone. So here we have the secondary transfer, and then I'll facet the crown. But later on I'm going to explain a very unusual occurrence that happens in faceting. As you will see in the following scenes that I'm faceting the crown and it has 7 sides. So what makes this particular gem a freeform more unusual than a symmetrical stone like a square or a round, and there is an unusual occurrence that is involved. You'll notice on asymmetrical freeform designs like this that the girdle facet index numbers do not match the crown facet index numbers. So with this particular asymmetrical design, you'll notice that on the design sheet that the pavilion girdle facet is represented as index number 2, but when you do the transfer and you're faceting the crown to meet the girdle line, it will be index number 94. So on a symmetrical gem, for example, if you're using a 96 index wheel and you're faceting an index on number 95 on the pavilion, you assume on the transfer that it's going to be 95, but it's not also. It will be number 1. So next time, just mark an index and remember the number on the pavilion, do the transfer, and just see where you end up. It won't be that same index. So as you can see, I've cut all the step cuts on the crown that match the 7 sides, and I've also cut the table facet. I need to add that when you're faceting these asymmetrical freeform designs, what you see on your dop stick doesn't match up to what you see on the design sheet. In point of fact, everything looks very confusing because you're faceting something that looks totally opposite on the dop. So here are the final scenes of the crown facets being polished in order from the girdle all the way up through to the table. So when you see me polishing the crown facets, that also means we're getting closer to the end of this video, and it's been a real pleasure that you could join me once again. A lot of my regular subscribers and viewers are always tuned in to watching me facet, and I have to admit this particular design, the free form, was not easy. I learnt a lot from it, and I hope you guys also learnt something from this video. So we still have the final reveal, so don't forget to watch that. And until next time, please like and subscribe, and take care everybody. It's bye for now.